I am super excited to embark on this project of building a large-scale architectural model of one of my favorite Art Deco skyscrapers in the country, the Carbide and Carbon Building. For the last 2 years, I've been working on something called the High Rises Project, which I started just out of my own fascination for old architecture. Basically, I've just been going around documenting the coolest antique skyscrapers, you could call them, all the way back from maybe 1890s until the 1930s, 1940s. Of my travels, I think my favorite building in the country is the Carbide and Carbon Building in Chicago. It's the building I chose for the cover of the High Rises book, and I have a big print of it on my wall that I've been looking at for months. And I knew I wanted to build a model. I've felt this for a while. I graduated architecture school 3 years ago, about now, and I really miss model making. There's something really fun about working with tiny little details, and it's kind of therapeutic to build a model and just get really precise with it. The High Rises project has really led me to appreciate the details of these old buildings. Use a drone to actually fly up and document these details hundreds of feet above the street that usually you can't really make out if you're all the way down at the sidewalk. And I'm just so inspired by the detail and craftsmanship up at the tops of these buildings. And I've documented them extensively through photography. And I think that 3D modeling, architectural modeling, is really the next step to fully understanding the beauty and the art that goes into these Art Deco skyscrapers. So why build an architectural model? A lot of models nowadays are built in the architectural concept stage, whether in architecture school or in practice. These models are used by designers to iterate and test ideas, and you just get a different sense of scale and space when you can hold the model physically than you can when it's in a computer. In my case, this model is a little bit different in that it is of an existing building. So my purpose for building this model is really to get a better understanding of this building. I think when you build something, you kind of know it inside and out.
Here is the high-rise image I created for the Carbide and Carbon Building. Zooming in, you can see all of these really incredible details of the building. And as I'm looking at this and thinking about turning it into an architectural model, I noticed kind of three different sections or elements to this building here. So first, you have these long vertical lines. This is characteristic of Art Deco, where they emphasize the verticals. And I think that basswood sticks are a great option for constructing this because there's not a lot of detail and there's just these subtle differences in depth in the facade. And basswood sticks come in a ton of different dimensional sizes where I can get these really subtle changes in depth. Next, there are these more detailed areas between these verticals. These include the windows as well as these decorative spandrel panels, we call them, these spaces between the windows. And I think that this needs to be 3D printed so that I can get this type of detail, and also the windows are super intricate. So that'll be great with a 3D printer. And I think I'll do that in some type of gray color, something different than the gold, which we get to next. There are these gorgeous gold details that shimmer in the sun. These are all heavily ornate. You can see all these beautiful patterns. This is another thing that I plan to 3D print and just embed this within the basswood sticks. Now, moving over to my 3D modeling program, I'm using Rhino here. It's kind of similar to like a Google SketchUp. And I want to walk you through how I started building this model digitally before I glue any sticks together, before I make this thing physical at all. I kind of want to work out what materials I'm using, how it's coming together, what dimensions of materials I need. So I'm building this at model scale rather than real world scale, so I can actually include the dimensions of the real materials I have available to me. So my first step here was getting all of these dimensional sizes of basswood sticks. I went to the art supply store and just saw what they had available, and then I could use these basswood sections to start arranging my plan here. So I'm using a ton of different sizes of them to achieve these subtle differences in depth on the facade. And the red lines are basswood. The black is what I would need to 3D print for the window inlays. And then once I kind of had this plan down, I started 3D modeling. So this is really a matter of just extruding all of these basswood stick sections. And you can see details like this where instead of having to like notch out one large basswood stick, I'm just laminating 3 of them together here, and I'll cut the middle one short so that I can inlay a 3D printed gold piece. I still have a ton of modeling left to do. All this gold is basically placeholder for where I need to intricately model all the details of the building, which is going to take a whole lot of time, but I think the end result will be well worth it. I still need to model the spire up here. I put in some floor plates. I have to model the details in the windows too as well. But it's really great having this digital model to kind of have an understanding of how this thing is going to come together. A handy technique I used to create this digital model is first I found the floor levels, the floor to floor height, which are these light green lines, and that was about 11 feet tall. And then I just counted the brick coursing, and then I divided out that 11 feet by the number of bricks, and that gave me great datum lines to understand how tall each of these detail sections are, how tall different sections of the buildings rise. And you can see in the building here that the brick lines are very, more stone lines, they're not really bricks, but they're very defined. So you can see that this gold section is 3 blocks tall, and then up top it's 3 blocks tall here. And all the way through, you can just count the brick courses. So that was a really easy way to 3D model this and get some level of accuracy. One quick modeling tip that I used here, because this building is so symmetrical, I actually only modeled 1/4 of the building. And then I just created a block of that quarter, which basically means if I edit this side, and let's say just like remove something like that, it will change on all 4 quarters. So this is great just as I was putting this together, not having to change one thing on one facade and then turn around to edit it on the other. So just a tip for you. To illustrate how I'm imagining using these basswood sticks, let's look at the center portion here. This is a kind of conglomeration of 5 different basswood sections, 3 of which are the same size, and then these 2 are the same size. And if we extrude this up, you can see at the top that these smaller sections are stopping short to allow for these other details, while the center portion goes fully up. And if we look at the building, you can see that there's this slight difference in depth where the center portion kind of protrudes out a little bit. And I can achieve that just by using a thicker basswood stick section here. And I quickly just clamped up some of the sticks that I had bought to illustrate this. You can see how this will start to come together. So because this model is more of like a presentation model, I thought it was appropriate to have it on some type of base. I'm not sure exactly what this will be made out of yet, and there's many different ways that this could materialize. Like I've thought about potentially elevating the model up and supporting it with some type of rods. Might be a cool look. On the base, I want to print out some information, some details. So currently this size is 13 by 19, which is the biggest my printer can print. But I could go bigger if I just divide it into 2 different panels. But for instance, if this model is kind of elevated, I could actually print out the floor plan of the building directly underneath it. I could have a architectural elevation drawing of the entire extent of the building, and then dash in a line showing what portion of the building is actually modeled here. I could include some history. I'll definitely include, of course, the title of the building, as well as the scale that the model is built in. And then another interesting thing that I've been exploring along the idea of this being a presentation model and something that you'd want like on a coffee table or in a living room I think it'd be so cool to actually wire in lights on this building. So I could imagine having LEDs on each of the floors, and I also want to do exterior lights. So in these parapet areas here, I'm imagining having uplights that would really just add drama to the building. And if you flip the lights in your room off and turn on these lights, it would be a really dramatic effect. And of course, once the spire is modeled in here, having uplights on the spire. And that's another thing that will be on the base. I'm imagining some really interesting like tactile switches, one for interior lights and one for exterior lights. And I think that I'll be able to pull it off with some custom wiring and some AA batteries. It's not something I've ever done before, but it's pretty typical in the world of like building dioramas. There's a lot of people on YouTube that wire in their own lights for little realistic miniature scenes. So I think having switches would just really make this more interactive and fun. Part of the process that I wanted to share here were these early AI explorations. This was actually before I even had the idea to do an actual architectural model. I just thought that this was an interesting exploration. I was using Midjourney, and I image prompted with my high-rise images, and then I added text saying make some type of light fixture inspired by Art Deco skyscrapers. So from these I started to get some inspiration and ideas just on scale and lighting, and materiality too. This looks like something that could be 3D printed. And I think more than anything, these just got me really excited about the idea of having a little skyscraper inside my house. And some of these are kind of more abstracted into just light fixtures. Some are more true to an actual building form like this. But they were really interesting exploration and definitely informed the process.
Another thing that I'm thinking about a lot is materiality and representation. A lot of times in architecture school, our professors would push us away from realism. In an architectural model, you don't necessarily want the glass to be blue and the grass to be green and the bricks to be red. Sometimes that can just look a little bit tacky. So oftentimes we do more of a diagrammatic representation of what we're trying to convey. So with this model, I could do something more diagrammatic, keeping the basswood this kind of light tan color, and I could do the 3D printed details in white instead of gold. But a big part of understanding this building, I think, is this like beautiful shimmering gold detailing. So that's something I'm going to try to keep, whether in just a gold filament for 3D printing those details, or maybe I need to sand, prime, and then paint with kind of a glossy gold paint. I'm not sure how it's going to look. I'm terrified that it's going to look tacky, but it's going to take some experimentation. If I do the gold detail in the 3D printing, I think that the wood has to be darker because, again, the big characteristic of the building is this contrast between the dark green stone and the gold detailing. So if I do the gold, I can't keep the basswood in this light tan. So I'm going to be doing a lot of experimentation to see what's going to work well for this model. I'm still in the early stages here, and I have an image in my head of what I want this final model to be like in its craftsmanship, in its detail, in its accuracy to the actual building. And if I can get like 80% to this image in my head, I'll be very happy. But it's scary once you start putting things together. Every single piece is an opportunity for inaccuracy, and if one wall is too tall, the floor plates will be skewed. Just it's kind of scary to actually start putting it together, and it's going to take a lot of time, and I'm going to be really careful as I construct this thing. So I'm really excited to document the process.